Hello and welcome back. In part one of this mini-series, I addressed the concern that a lot of people feel where history today is taught differently than how it was taught in the past. And while that's certainly a big concern that needs to be addressed, it's not the only concern about how history is taught. I often find that when people aren't complaining about their children's history education, they're complaining about their own. People often tell me that history wasn't fun while they were in school, but they like it well enough as an adult. And I find this very interesting because history has always been my favorite subject. So I guess however I was taught history worked well enough for me. But listening to other people talk about how they feel about history, both then and now, is very revealing about the ways that it didn't work for them. And when we isolate what didn't work for them, we can use that to do better. One of the biggest protests that I hear from people is that history never felt like it mattered. Returning viewers will remember from part one that histories are written in response to current events. Often they tell you more about the time in which they were written rather than about which they're written. And histories are written in response to intellectual movements or political events or any other current trend that ostensibly matters to somebody. Here are a few examples that I'm going to pull from my bookshelf. From Madame Lalaurie. My purpose in writing this book has been to discover the truth about the stories surrounding Madame Lalaurie. While earlier authors have relied on published sources and their own inventions, I am the first to make extensive use of the archival record to reconstruct the lives of Delphine McCarty Lalaurie and her extended family. I have devoted particular attention to identifying all of her human property, and I have attempted to name the enslaved men, women, and children who were the subjects of her cruelty, and to trace the fates of those who survived the fire. From Code Girls. Even now, the disciplines that are hardest for women to break into, like math and laboratory and computer science, are the ones that are believed to depend on innate genius, a trait long and wrongly associated chiefly with men. The literature of code breaking has played into this myth. Stories about code breaking exploits often focus on a titanic genius who enjoys a flash of inspiration that breaks the code and releases a stream of vital information. Narratives like these encourage the notion that genius springs isolated from the brain of a lone individual, inevitably male. The legendary names enshrined in the public history of code breaking are those of brilliant men like Alan Turing at Bletchley Park, Joe Rochefort, the American naval officer who helped mastermind the code breaking that led to the victory in the Battle of Midway, or Meredith Gardner, the American cryptanalyst who recovered the meaning of Russian messages as a part of a U.S. program codenamed Verona that led to the exposure of Soviet spies. Their reputation is often burnished by eccentricity. Joe Rochefort is depicted as pacing his underground lair in Oahu, wearing a smoking jacket and slippers, or their tragic end as when Alan Turing was persecuted for homosexuality and committed suicide. But all along there have been female geniuses whose contributions are as important. It's just that far less attention has been paid to them, and often these women were denied the top spots that would have brought them more recognition. Or in Incarnations, A History of India in 50 Lives, India's history is a curiously unpeopled place. As usually told, it has dynasties, epics, religions, and castes, but not many individuals. Beyond a few iconic names, most of the important historical figures recede into a haze, both for people outside India and for many Indians themselves. This book is an experiment in dispelling some of the fog by telling India's story through 50 remarkable lives. Each one of these books is doing something, setting the record straight, introducing new ideas, new ways of telling a story. One of the great shortcomings of textbooks is that they don't give you a reason why any of this stuff matters, or a very general reason why it matters, or an outdated reason why it matters. The result is that it turns history into something very dull to study, and the antidote is to give the student a more pressing reason why what they're learning matters. Or better yet, Give them the opportunity to do work that matters to them, and have them practice articulating why what they're doing matters, both to them and to the world at large. And on a psychological level, this articulation about why what they're doing matters serves as a commitment mechanism, getting them invested in their own course of study. I also hear from a lot of people some variation of, I like X history, but we only learned Y history in school. And I would hear this most often when I was working in museums. People would come in, they'd have a great time with the exhibits, they'd go on my tour, and at the end they would say, I had so much fun. I never learned any of this while I was in school, and I think I would have liked history a lot more if I had learned about this stuff. And there's a couple of things going on there. First of all, adults have more background information. They're better able to compare new information to what they already know because they've accrued more knowledge because they've been at this longer. This gives them the necessary context that it takes to understand the significance of a piece of information. Maybe it completes a puzzle that they've been working through for years, or maybe it contradicts something that they already know, adding a nuance or challenging what they used to believe, or maybe they find it really funny, but you have to know certain facts in order to get the joke. Is your name Hammurabi because you sure do like to Babylon? Is only funny if you know that Hammurabi was the king of Babylon. Additionally, adults' brains literally work differently than children's brains, and it's not just about the ability to contextualize longer periods of time and chronology either. Adults, well, some adults anyway, have the ability to think abstractly, and that's something that you develop in your teenage years. It's not strictly necessary in understanding history, but it's very helpful in recognizing patterns and understanding the significance of certain events. Third, adults just have a better sense of what they like. If you're an adult and you have a certain amount of spare time on your day trip or whatever, you're going to make sure you do something you enjoy. And if you're doing history on your day off, you're gonna do fun history. Choice is important to enjoyment, and you want to give as much choice as you can, but at the end of the day, all your students have to learn about the French Revolution. And ironically, it's often this base layer of facts and information that allow people the context to enjoy history later on. But investing your future hobbies is a bit flimsy when you're a bored teenager, so let's take a closer look at who historians are imagining as their audience when they write histories. When people get reflective over their own history education, they often say that they felt like the history was written about someone else. We are a deeply communal species, and at the same time, we are so egocentric. We like to hear stories about people like us so that we can contextualize our own existences within the larger society. I remember the first time that I ever read a history that was like that for me. It was a book called A Testament of Youth. I almost didn't read it because it was a memoir rather than a real history written from the academic disciplinarian point of view. But when I read it, I was like, wow, there have always been 20-something women who have to navigate that point of view in the world. And I loved it so much, I gave it to multiple people as gifts, and I adored the movie when it came out. So representation matters, both in the person who writes the history, the people the history is written about, and the audience who's expected to read that history. The solution I see to this particular problem for K-12 teachers is to vary the approach to any historical topic. For example, you could teach the Civil War as a military history, a political history, a social history, a technological history, environmental history, women's history, black history. Show the kids an embalmed corpse and read All Quiet on the Potomac tonight. Make it clear that the story makes more sense the more perspectives you include. Engage the students in doing history. Show them that they can approach a topic from any perspective they want and can argue anything as long as the facts support that argument. And here I'd like to circle back to the just the facts discussion, because while it's not enough to have facts without interpretation, it's also not enough to have interpretation without facts. You have to have both. In a column for Perspectives on History, Professor Litwick touches on this paradigm as he discusses the integrity of Black studies as serious academic work. He points out that just as there are doubters who use charges of political correctness to mask their skepticism about African American history and multicultural studies as serious academic endeavors, so too do the race hustlers and propagandists continue to ply their wares. And while I certainly won't be making the point that this anti-intellectual behavior is the reason why the doubters doubt, racist people would not be convinced even if the students were engaging in perfect intellectual integrity, it is emblematic of a larger problem. What I'll often see, especially on the internet, is that a scholar spends hundreds of pages arguing a thesis, but the only thing that spreads is the argument itself without any of the evidence. And so that thesis statement then gets spread around and sometimes distorted, and that's the popular version that most people understand rather than the evidence-based claim the scholar had written in the first place. But even if everybody is acting and arguing and studying in good faith, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to have the same interpretation of the same facts. The facts can mean a lot of different things to different people, and if you have a classroom of 20 students, expect 20 different interpretations of those facts. And they'll each have something interesting, useful, and unique to add to historical understanding if they're taught that history is a way of disciplining and articulating their thoughts. Thank you for sticking with this series through part 2. Let me know in the comments how your appreciation of history has changed over time, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.